Welcome everyone. Weapons at your side. Actually, before we begin, a few things to just keep in mind. We do have a forms competition going on. So if you're interested in submitting one of the forms for that, there's a bunch of categories about it. If you're interested in finding more information, you can go into the Facebook page. Do you think you can sword? There's also the YouTube channel. The YouTube channel doesn't have as much information. Most of it is on the Facebook page. So if you're thinking about you want to try something for a form or something like that, that's a great place to do it. Let's get started. Weapons at your side. Arte.
Arte.
Ardore.
Adore.
Onore.
Onore.
All right, weapons at your, put your weapons down. Let's do a warm-up. Hey, Sander. All right, start rolling your shoulders back. So what we're doing for this month is we're looking at advanced Giocco Stretto. Hey, Tony. Essentially, we can't necessarily do party drills. I can actually give us Tony and Sander some variations on that if you guys want to practice with stabbing each other, switch directions. But ultimately, again, practicing mechanics, making sure that we have a good foundational movement library for us to work with as we come back to fighting other people. Hands to the side, start rotating your forearms around your elbows. So the goal of today's class will be, we're going to be looking at some of the core footwork that we're going to be looking for most thrusting. We're going to be looking at the thrusting mechanics. Both hands go up, one hand goes forward, one hand goes back. Then you're going to keep on rotating. They meet back on the top, they meet at the bottom. And you're just going to be rotating that way. So we're looking at footwork that kind of comes up in a lot of the thrusting that we're going to be doing. We're going to be looking at thrusting from all different quadrants and how to do it successfully, well, and mindful of, well, there's no swords there, so mindful of your point. Switch directions. And then putting it together and how to move from Giocco largo to Giocco Stretto. So from a cut to moving to a thrust, and from a thrust moving to a cut. If at any point you have questions or you have any requests of anything you want to see, of anything specific, you're like, yeah, I want to try this thing out, we can absolutely switch the class into that. Otherwise, I will be playing along with what I have in mind. Hands on your hips. Start making nice big circles with your hips. One of my favorite things about the videos that I have the gallery view right now, switch directions. And I basically have a bunch of people doing this with me. It's a bunch of videos of us just going, yeah, let's turn those hips. It looks great. All right, feet a little bit wider than shoulder width apart. If you want to bend your knees, you can. Keep your back straight. You're going to be rotating your shoulders around your waist. I like to keep my legs actually straight. That actually gives me a little bit of a hamstring activation. Switch directions. And if you're wondering why I'm wearing a hat, it's because I don't want my hair in my face. This is my headband today, so I'm gonna try it out to see how it goes.
I've got the tiniest pink hairband in right now.
Oh, I can see it, yes. Once my hair gets longer, I'll either put it in a ponytail, a man bun, or I'll just get a headband and embrace that. All right, bring your feet together, bend your knees, start making small circles with your knees. Switch directions. All right, shake out your body. All right, we're going to try some balancing poses, and we're going to be incorporating some of the handwork for the different guards. So what we're going to start with is you're going to be facing your left. You're going to be lifting up your right foot. You're going to be stretching out your right foot, and you're going to be stepping and landing in a lunge position. As you do this, you can also lift up your hands so that they go above you. As you lift up your leg, as you fall into your lunge, place your hands by your side. They're straight forward, straight back. You're trying to create a nice profile position. You're trying to focus on your knee, making sure that your knee is rotated out towards your left. Make sure as much as you can, have the knee over the heel and just relax in this position. We're just in a nice, good yoga warrior 2 or lunge as we do our sword fighting. From here, I want to bring up both my hands to the ceiling. Take a nice deep breath, relax your shoulders, roll your shoulders down, make sure that your shoulders are not hiked up. Think about creating space between your biceps and your ears. Then extend both hands forward as if you're holding a gun. Then bring your hands down about where you would have posta longa. From here, you're going to have your left hand in front of your right. You're going to roll up into posta finestra. Then you're going to go to the opposite side, trying to keep your feet planted. Your hips need to move, but keeping the left hand in front, you're going to try to go to finestra on the opposite side. Then back to finestra on the inside, finestra on the outside. Inside, outside, back to posta longa. Switch your hands, right hand in front, finestra on the inside, finestra on the outside. So what we're working on here, just keep on switching between inside and outside. Try to have nice long arms. Try to stay stable. Your lower body is not really moving. You're just letting your torso and your hips move as much as it needs to. Bring your hands back down to posta longa. Bring your feet back up. Turn to the other side. Let's try the same thing on the opposite side. We're going to start by lifting up our hands. Left leg comes up. Extend your foot back. Land into your lunge. You can extend, bring your hands down into one pointed forward, one pointed back. Nice profile position. Bring your knee, your right knee to the right side. Make sure that you're nice and centered. Back leg nice and strong. Take a nice deep breath. Inhale. Exhale. Hand comes up on the inhale. On the exhale, bring it forward as if you're pointing a gun. Then bring it down into posta longa. As you're here, pay attention to where your shoulders are. If they're hunching forward, roll them back. It's an action that brings your shoulder blades down, bring your shoulders down, engages your core. From here, right hand goes on top of the left. You're going to roll up to finestra on the inside, finestra on the outside. And just rolling from one to the other. Keep your arms extended in front of you. You want to have them as far forward as you can without locking them into position. And you're just going from side to side, keeping them soft, not locked, but still as extended as you can in front of you. Don't forget to breathe. Make sure that you're nice and stable. Switch back to posta longa. Switch your hands, same thing, going on the inside and the outside. Keep your hands nice and extended. It's really thinking about letting the torso do the lateral motion. It's not your arms that are moving, it's your chest that points from one side to the other. One side to the other, and back down to posta longa. Bring your feet up and relax. All right, footwork. We're going to be doing a little bit of footwork exercises. There's a lot of different variations that we can work on. I want to work on passes and accrescimentos with the front foot. So footwork can work. There's really, if I'm trying to move my back foot forward, there's three directions it can go. It can go straight forward. It can go to the same side it's on, or it can go across my body. So what I want to make sure that we have down is, as we step, when I'm stepping forward, I'm just gonna move a little bit further so that you can see my foot, hopefully. I am stepping and just landing as I would normally. When I'm stepping off to the off line, my toe and my knee are pointed in the same direction of motion. My enemy, though, is not. So once I finish the offline motion, I correct my orientation so that I'm facing this new enemy, or this deep position relative to my opponent. When I'm stepping across, the most important thing is your toe and your knee stay pointed towards your opponent. So if the camera is my opponent, as I step, my knee and my toe are actually pointed towards you, not in the direction of my body's moving, but towards my opponent. So that once I finish the step, I reset, so that I'm back towards where I started. So what I want to do now for the next couple minutes is we're going to be starting with the left foot forward. We're going to step forward, step back, step offline, do a compass step, reset, then step cross line, reset with a back foot, then reset back towards where you started. So if I'm looking at the camera, I'll do it again. We can actually, let's go offline, forward, cross line. So I'm stepping offline, then I reset, I step in line, reset, I step cross line, reset, having my left foot forward. All right, I'm gonna call them out. We're gonna do this for 30 seconds, and we're gonna do the same thing with the other foot. So starting offline, reset, inline, reset, cross line, reset, 1, reset, 2, reset, 3, reset, 1, reset, 2, reset, 3, recover. Keep your knees bent as you do this. Try to stay low as you're doing the movement. You're trying to focus on stability and making sure that you're not caught flat-footed. Keep your weight in the balls of the feet. Switch which foot is forward. We're going to start offline to the left. 1, recover. Inline, 2, recover. Cross line, 3, recover. 1, recover. 2, recover. 3, recover. 1, recover. 2, recover. 3, recover. Okay. Let's add what your front foot does. So there's, again, 3 directions of motions that we can move with our front foot, and it's really 2. Front, so if I have my left foot forward, my front foot, I'm just gonna do it sideways so you can see me a little bit better. I can move straight forward or straight to the left. In terms of tactics and options available, they're both very similar. If I move my front foot forward or to the side, I can pass in the same directions, the same 3 directions we just saw. So let's say I step forward, I can go to my right. I step forward, I can still go forward. And I can step forward, and then we go cross line. Both are options available, all 3 are options available to you. Once you start stepping across your center line, first thing to consider is if I'm doing an accrescimento to the right, I make sure that my toe and my knee are pointed towards my opponent again, because that's where the direction of force that I'm going to be exerting. Once I've done this, there's really only one option. I can just keep on moving in the same line I was on, and then reset back towards where we started. So if I do it from the side, I can step across, continue in the same direction that I'm moving, and then center back facing my opponent. So next 30 seconds, starting with the left foot forward, we're just going to step forward or to the side, and then we're going to go same idea as before. Offline, inline, cross line. So there's going to be accrescimento, step to the right, reset. Accrescimento, step forward, reset. Accrescimento, step cross line, reset. Okay, let's start. 1, accrescimento, offline, reset. 2, accrescimento, forward, reset. 3, accrescimento, cross line, reset. 1, reset. 2, reset. 3, reset. 1, reset. 2, reset. 3. Reset. If you want to add a little bit of more briskness, just keep on going at your own pace. You can think about it as 2 very quick sort of motions that you're moving from one place to the next. Think about almost jumping into the motion. All right, switch legs. I'll count them out again. If you want to go at your pace, feel free to do so. 1, accrescimento, offline, reset. 2, accrescimento, inline, reset. 3, accrescimento, crossline, reset. 1, accrescimento, offline, reset. 2, forward, reset. 3, crossline, reset. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, reset. Okay. That gets us moving in the way that a lot of the thrusts are going to be executed. The cross-line pass. So especially when you're doing stepping across your body and across again, typically it will come up in thrusting situations. It's going to come up in defensive situations. And it really comes across when you're trying to move strongly across your opponent when you have a center line control. What the accrescimento across the body lets you do is lets you stay profile and extending your weapon and towards your opponent without presenting as much of a target. If I step with my back foot, I square up more. If I step with my front foot, it keeps myself more profile. I can move across my opponent's weapon, away from it or into it, and then I can step forward into whatever the new scenario is. So grab a quick sip of water. Let's get swords. Do any of you have any questions as of now?
Oh.
So the thrusts are dictated by the point of the sword. In terms of the 3 advantages, what is the most important of the 3 advantages when you're delivering a thrust?
Crossing.
Crossing. What about a cut? When you're delivering a cut, which one is the most important of the 3 advantages?
True edge.
I'd say leverage.
Not quite.
Leverage?
Leverage. When you're delivering a cut, leverage is more important than crossing or true edge. And when you're delivering a thrust, getting crossing first is the most important of them all. A cut has inertia that allows you to overcome poor position. It allows you to move into a strong position with just leverage. Whereas with a thrust, because it is entirely positional, it's entirely geometric, having control of the point is going to be the most critical thing. So let's start with Porta de Ferro. And what I want to emphasize on the cuts that we have are getting the point where it needs to be. If you do have a partner, you can actually present a sword for it to strike through. If you don't, we're just going to do it against the air. What I want to work on is the point comes up first. So especially if I'm delivering a thrust, not a cut, I'm pushing the pommel and I'm getting the point of my sword in position. So right now I'm actually doing so with a little bit of forward. My lead hand and my pommel hand both move forward in such a way that my point gets into place. Once it's into place, I can extend the point forward and then follow through with my thrust of choice. So if I'm doing it from the side, whoop, I got my curtain, I get the point over top, extend the sword into position, follow through the thrust. Simple exchange of the thrust. What I want to focus on is make sure that the point of the sword, everything else doesn't really matter. Get the point of the sword in position first. Once that happens, here's going to be the interesting component of the thrust. The point of the sword should always be moving closer to your opponent. Without a depth perception, it's difficult to illustrate, but my point moves towards the camera closer all the time. Even if my hand is moving a little bit offline, my point moves forward. So if I were to draw a line, it's kind of a curve, always getting closer. If my point moves away from my opponent, that's giving them an opportunity to respond. So what are we going to do in our exchange exercise, or just a simple thrust? The footwork, up to you to work the different variations. Get the point in line first. Extend the sword, follow through with a step that you want. If you are adding any sort of a movement of the front leg, it happens immediately after the point is in place. The point has arrived, I can move my front foot, I can move my back foot. I want to break it down into order, and especially if you do have a partner to work with, make sure that the crossing is in place. You have crossing, you can enhance the crossing by stepping into the sword or stepping away from the sword. Now is a time where you can extend forward to maximize your, let me start that again. Get the point in place, start the extension of the hands, then add the step. You want to make sure that you have found you have started the extension of your hands, you're coming from breve to longa. Now you can add movement of the front foot, then you can add the movement of the back foot. So for the next minute or so, we're going to just be doing porta de ferro, and you can add the different types of footwork here. You can think about, I find, extend, step away with my back foot, recover, find, gain, step forward, recover, find, gain, step across and into the weapon, reset with the back foot, recover. So we're just adding the same footwork that we had. You can add a movement of the front leg or not. You're moving away, in, and into the weapon. Okay? Go ahead and begin. So move away, reset. Move forward, reset. Move in, reset. Away, reset. Forward, reset. Across, reset. Away, reset. Forward, reset. Across, reset. Away, reset. Forward, reset. Across, reset. I'm going to give you another 20 seconds. If you're a partner, provide a little bit of opposition as well if you want, just to try, just to make sure that you can test the position ever so slightly. Good. Relax. Roll your shoulders. We'll do the same thing with, actually before we do the same thing from Chingara, I want you to hold the sword in front of you. Feet nice and square. Without moving your sword, without moving your arms, move the sword from the inside line to the outside line. My arms are static. I can move, the point can stay mostly forward. I can move my sword to one side. I can move my sword to the other by primarily just turning my torso. In fact, if you can try to keep the point static, I'm actually going to use my curtain here. I'm just going to use this little loop. I'm going to try to leave the point where it is, and I'm going to be changing where my sword is. the edge of the sword changes, its position to my body changes, but I'm doing so through my hips. So when you're changing from line to line, keep that in mind. You're not using your arms, so my torso is not static and I'm extending with my arms. I'm just changing what I'm facing, making sure that the point is still in the same place. I can control where the point is. All right? From Chingara, crossing is key. I can do this with a false edge. I can push on the pommel and get the point across the center line. I'm doing so with a false edge. I can extend the sword forward, then getting my true edge, leverage, and if I'm maintaining crossing, then extend. So really think about it from Chingara, get the crossing by pushing the pommel down and getting the point over. Right now I'm just using the flat, the false edge of the sword. It controls the center line, it has crossing, everything else moves from there. An important thing to recognize from this transition is if I have my sword here and I just push on the pommel, the point goes to the other side. You can kind of see how right now I'm rotating around the mezza spada. That's incorrect in terms of delivering a thrust. Once I get the point across, I leave the point where it is and I move the rest of the sword to catch up to that. The point of rotation is the point of my sword, not my pommel. So I get the crossing. The point stays mostly static in relationship to my body, and I get the rest of the sword in there. So for the next minute and a bit, let's try this out. Footwork is the same as the other time. Get the point, get true edge, get leverage, start extending. If you want to move your front foot, now is the time. Then you can follow through with the step that you want. So we're moving away, in, and into as we do this. Go ahead and begin. Away, forward, and into. Away, forward, and into. Whew. I ran out of space. Ten more seconds. And pause.
So, question.
Go ahead.
Question for you. So I know that when we fine and gain with rapier, we tend to keep the hilt static and move the tip across so we don't have this angle collapse in on us.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that different for longsword?
Leverage. Two hands. It's a little bit different. Without context of where my opponent's sword is, it's a little bit more difficult to adjust, but the two-handed sword can actually move much more strongly than a single-handed sword. Once you have a single-handed sword, the entire fulcrum is in your hand. You need to use your pinky and the strength of your fingers to create a lot of the leverage that you can accomplish with a longsword by having a longer fulcrum. So with a longsword, I can actually get the position with crossing my hands. I don't necessarily need to do something like this where my hands are entirely exposed, but it has a little bit of wiggle room as to how much I can get my point across. So ultimately, the principle is the same. I don't want to give too much of an oblique angle, otherwise my opponent can just overcome it. But I have a little bit more space to get a stronger crossing because the leverage the pommel gives me. Does that answer your question, Eric?
I don't think so. Right, so like I know, like when I fine and gain rapier, like my point goes past my opponent's shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying to keep the point there and move my hilt side to side.
So that's a good, so what Eric is saying is, what Eric's demonstrating is, right now the point is staying static in relationship to my body, not to my opponent.
Ah.
So right now I am maintaining this point in relationship to my body. Depending on where my opponent's sword is, I need to maintain crossing. So you need to stay on top, absolutely. You can't just suddenly let go of the crossing because you lose the crossing. So that's why I use my body as a reference point, because there's no opponent right now. I can't say keep the crossing. But in relationship to my body, the point stays in the same general area that I'm facing. It's my facing that changes. It's my distance to my opponent that changes. It's a relative position that changes, which is what the crossing will have.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I can't demonstrate that right now.
Yeah, I think I understand.
Let's actually do an exercise that's interesting. I'm going to use my curtain here to demonstrate coming from finestra into posta longa. And this is one of the more interesting thrusts because it is super powerful in terms of crossing, but it's super easy to do it wrong. I'm in a rear-weighted finestra. I can actually cross my opponent's sword just by extending my hands forward into finestra. So right now, if my eyes are pointing in the direction of the sword, you can see how I'm actually very strongly crossed across someone's sword. This is actually my crossing. I can just rotate my sword down and descend upon the center line with control. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to use my little, I'm going to use this little leaf on my curtain here. I'm not leaving the point static in relationship to the leaf. I'm actually moving it along the line here so that as I'm coming from posta finestra to posta longa, my point is coming down. And as I'm coming down, my hands rotate into posta longa. So I am in finestra. I'm extending the sword forward. As I extend, I can roll down. And part of why I wanted to show it with a curtain is that I'm at an angle to the curtain so that I'm actually moving into my opponent towards that direction. My point is moving forward, forward, forward the entire time. And I shouldn't really need to, I'm extending and I'm almost touching the curtain, but I'm not quite at it. It's moving into my opponent the entire time. So you're strongly crossed. So one of the easiest mistakes to do with a posta finestra is have it pointed forward. Don't worry about that. Point it strongly across your body. This is actually stronger in terms of defense. I don't need to be threatening my opponent. This is threatening enough. I extend it forward, roll down, the point moving towards your opponent and descending a little bit, but still moving forward. So it's not coming straight down and forward. It is a corkscrew moving into my opponent the entire time. And we can do it from finestra, sinestra, same idea. I am extending forward, rolling down, rolling down, rolling down, and proceeding into my opponent. It's like I'm not stabbing my sword over my opponent's sword. I'm extending the flat towards it. Then I descend, and I proceed forward with a thrust. So, as with the other exercises, we're going to do the same type of footwork. The timing is going to be slightly different. I'm extending my sword forward. If I want to step with my front foot, I'm actually going to do it as I transition. Wait, no, I'm not. Scratch that. I'm going to extend forward. If I'm going to do a transition with my front foot, it's going to be when I'm in posta longa. Why? Why do it here when I'm in posta longa and not do it when I am in finestra earlier? Why do it later rather than earlier?
You're easier to counter?
Part of it is easier to counter.
Your space?
Part of it is your space. Any other thoughts?
A little bit extra time to see what the opponent does with that too.
Sorry, say that again, John?
Extra time there to get into position before you commit your body forward. See what your opponent does.
So both are correct. If you move your body too early, easier to counter. If you wait a little bit longer, basically lets you know, okay, where do I need to move my body? It has one of the biggest advantages of the finestra thrust is I have all this time to get into position. Once I'm in position, now I can go, okay, now I can enhance this by moving my body as it needs to. So the biggest advantage, and essentially the biggest disadvantage if you're not ready for it, of a fenestra thrust is that it takes a pretty long time. The time gives you time to respond to what your opponent might be doing. So wait until, there's caveats to this, but for now, we're gonna wait. We're gonna start in rear weighted fenestra. We're gonna roll forward into posta longa, and then you're gonna step with your front foot if you want. Then you can step away. Reset. Roll forward, step forward into your opponent, and then roll forward and step across and reset. Okay? Starting now, go ahead and begin. Starting in fenestra, do the same footwork we've been practicing. Fenestra, accrescimento, step forward. Fenestra, accrescimento, cross line. Fenestra, accrescimento, step off line. Step forward. Step cross line. We're going to watch you for a moment. And if you do have a sword in front of you, you don't need to touch the sword at all. That's one of the nice things about it. You can avoid sword contact throughout the entire motion unless you're moving into the weapon. Sword contact is not necessary for this to be successful. All right, start if you want. Start doing it from fenestra on the opposite line. Starting fenestra, sinestra. Find, crescimento, step off line, in line, and cross line. For the next minute, go from fenestra on the right side, fenestra on the left side. The footwork, up to you. Ten more seconds. And pause. Grab a quick sip of water if you need to. For the last 20 minutes or so, we're going to be combining an entry from Giocco largo into a thrust in Giocco Stretto. The simplest way to do this, and I encourage you to do this at your own time, is coming from a cut from fendente or reverso fendente into posta breve, extend, and thrust. You can think about it as a parry. You can think about it as a feint or an attack to miss, combining some of the stuff we saw last week. It's really, I'm coming with a strong strike into the center line and extend into a thrust. The principle here to highlight is make sure that the order is right. I am moving the sword, moving the sword, moving the sword, following with my body, making sure that I'm cutting, extending, and striking. Even if I am moving at speed, I want to make sure that the sword is in place before I get the rest of my body. It's super easy to think about cut, start moving, and extend as you step. That'll be the easiest mistake to to do, especially if you don't have someone punishing you for that. So we're going to start with a kind of one of the steps from the Spadone assault because it is fun to do, and we're going to be doing it into Finestra. So I'm going to start in a Cinghiara. I'm going to deflect a sword in front of me. If you have a partner, I can do so with your partner. You deflect the sword. You're going to start pushing a thrust up in Finestra. And you're going to do so with a step. So think about deflect, push the sword forward into Finestra with a step, if you have space. From here, because you want to be safe, you're going to roll into Posta Longa and finish the thrust in Posta Longa. So I'm doing it to the camera. I am deflecting, thrusting, finishing in Posta Longa. You can do it with a step every time. You can do it with just one single step. Space constraint makes me go deflect, begin to thrust, finish in Posta Longa. And you can do the same thing from the opposite side. Beat. You're coming from Porta de Ferro. You're delivering a small fendente to a sword. Actually, you're going to be coming laterally to beat it to the side. You're going to be extending and threatening your opponent high. You're going to try to parry this. You're going to roll down into Posta Longa. So, alternating between the two, I am deflecting, starting a thrust in Posta Finestra, ending in Posta Longa. Then from Porta de Ferro, beat to the side, extend up into Finestra, roll down into Posta Longa. And if you have a partner there, you can go, there's a sword right in the way. So the footwork might change a little bit depending on what my opponent is doing. If my opponent's sword gets beaten to the side and they don't move, if I just deflect and they don't move, I just stab them. If I deflect, they're trying to try to parry right away. So you can imagine I beat the sword to the side. They try to come back on the same line. I lift up. They need to back up to defend against that. That's what gives me that opportunity to move forward. There might be a disengagement in here depending on what they're doing. But really think about, yes, there you go. As you deflect, lifting, it's almost like you deflect, you initiate a thrust, you roll up into Finestra. They try to do something about it, you roll down into Posta Longa. All right? So alternating between the two, deflect, thrust high and low. Back to Porta de Ferro. Deflect, thrust high and low. Back to Cinghiara. Deflect, thrust high and low. And thank you, Leah. I see a few nice variations that you can consider as well is after the deflection, lift high, stay under sword and move into the weapon to maximize your leverage. I saw I think Tony doing that. That is a perfectly great idea where you deflect and lift high, you have a lot of leverage, lower it so that you're a little bit safer, but move into the weapon so that you maintain that crossing and maintain that leverage. That's a great way to incorporate that.
What's the action that, tell me if I'm seeing it correct. So I'm deflecting, thrusting high, and
yes.
The first one was coming down low on the other side, right?
It really depends on what my opponent is doing.
Okay, because I was curious about what is my opponent doing that allows me to go to the other side.
I will show you, actually, because you have I'll give you two options. Option number one, I will actually stay on the same side. I deflect, lift high, and stay on the same line, just moving into the weapon.
Covering them.
Option number two, it requires them to do a slightly different play, which will look like I deflect, I come high. They push on my sword, they try to parry down. As they parry down, and they're strongly trying to parry down, I come in and strike around them, using my false edge to strike around their sword. It again depends on what your opponent is doing, but that's two actions that you can practice with Tony. Which would be, I encourage masks just that you can do it with comfort. But thinking about deflect, threaten high. You can think about this as a feint. They need to respond to this. If they don't respond to it, you can follow through with the same line. they start pushing into your sword, into your debole, you can roll with that and let them come down slide into your forte as you use your false edge to strike around their sword. Cool. So that's one option. Option two, it's slightly more complicated, but again, without, you guys can practice with each other. You deflect, extend high. As they start pushing, you disengage, find on the opposite line, and strike on the outside. So those are three variations on the same drill. One is deflect, threaten high. On the same line, find it lower and step into the weapon. You can threaten high and come to the offside to strike with a punta falsa. Or you threaten high, as they push, you disengage and find on the opposite line. Does that answer the question, Sander?
Yeah, totally. We'll try those. Thank you.
Sweet. All right, let's try that a few more times. And if you want to incorporate those mechanics into the drill, feel free to do so. They're just nice to think about. You create a deflection, you threaten high. You can come on the opposite, down on the opposite line. You can come down on the same line. You can even incorporate deflect, threaten, disengage, and strike. The disengage is a little bit more iffy because, well, there's nothing to disengage, so unless you do have something, and that just creates a false sense of security. But otherwise, those are nice mechanics to practice. Keep on going. Let's do it for another 30 seconds. And pause. Okay, those are some awesome questions. I hope the talk about partner drill makes sense. If you do have any more questions, you can ask them over by Discord. I can help out, like draw it out or something. I'll figure out a way to demonstrate it if you want a bit more information. This also applies for anyone watching this after the fact. Just watching the recording, just ask me over by Discord or by Facebook. I can happily answer any of the questions that you might have. Any other questions about this particular form? All right, let's try something where we go low and then start high. So just to make it a little bit more interesting, I need to end in a place where my sword is low. It's either going to be in Cinghiara or Porta de Ferro. The end of the drill is really going to be, I have found myself in a low guard. I need to execute a thrust. I'm going to do the thrust. So I'm actually going to start in Finestra, and I'm going to initiate a thrust up high. I'm going to get, actually pointed towards you, towards the camera. I extend my sword gets defeated. I'm going to drop the point and deliver a tuta fendente all the way to the ground. Imagine my opponent is either backing up or something along those sorts. For simplicity right now, I can really think about I'm beginning a thrust. My opponent decides to parry strongly down. I yield and deliver a cut. They back up. I finish my cut all the way down. I'm trying to do a very powerful blow to get him to run far enough away. I finish the thrust. I finish the cut. I initiate a thrust right away. So if I do it with a bit more space, I'm beginning a thrust. Do a tuta fendente, cutting down towards my opponent. They have backed away. I find that center line and follow through with the thrust. Without an opponent, this thrust is just on the center line, doesn't really matter. If you do have an opponent, find their sword. So as they back up, they're going to present a sword for you. You're going to find, gain, and strike through that sword. This works on both sides, where I'm starting on the opposite finestra, deliver a thrust. They push my sword down, they deliver a reverse of fendente, ending in Porta de Ferro. From here, push the pommel down, extend the sword, and follow through with the thrust. So I'll walk you through it again. I'm in Finestra. I initiate a thrust. My opponent parries it down. I yield, deliver a cut, with or without a step, up to you. You finish the cut, initiate a thrust right away, finding any and striking through whatever your opponent is giving you. Opposite side, extend a thrust, they push your sword down, you deliver a tuta fendente, tuta reversa fendente, all the way to Porta de Ferro, initiate a thrust right away. A nice variation that I see is, instead of delivering a full cut all the way to the ground, you're cutting into posta breve, perfectly fine variation. For the purpose of practicing the mechanics, especially by yourself, it's nice to really think about delivering a full cut and then coming out of it with a thrust. So initiate a thrust, deliver a full cut, come out of it with a thrust. Thrust, they push you down, cut, thrust. Thrust, yield, cut, thrust. Thrust, yield, cut, thrust. Thrust, yield, cut, thrust. To add a little bit more impetus to go all the way to Porta de Ferro or Cinghiara, really think about the action as I'm delivering a thrust. My opponent is parrying this. They have their sword in front of you. Break that sword with a cut to the sword, coming all the way down, and then come back with a thrust once your sword is expelled.
And is your sword sitting on top of theirs from that cut into the thrust, or are they disengaged?
I don't know. Depends on what they're doing. Either they're disengaged, they can disengage, they can get expelled, or they can back away. Imagining the opponent, right now I'm thinking I'm cutting all the way to the ground for the purpose of just doing a full cut all the way to the ground. Let's imagine their sword is getting expelled. I am in Cinghiara point offline. Then I follow through with a thrust that's available to me. I am not focusing on sword contact in this particular component. I'm really thinking about my sword is, if I do it slowly, I'm delivering my thrust. My sword is in Giocco largo. I'm not coming into Giocco Stretto here. I was in Giocco Stretto here. I am moving into Giocco largo, Giocco largo, Giocco largo, moving back into Giocco Stretto. So there is a few transitions that you would have to consider here. Okay, how much time? We have about 5 more minutes. Okay. Any questions?
We were just seeing like you were yielding like high on the tuta volta. Does it? You can also do it small. Is that okay? Does that matter a lot?
Yeah, you have context, so yes, it will matter. It depends on how powerfully your opponent pushes you. So I'm delivering my thrust here. My opponent pushes slightly. I can actually do this with a mezza volta to maintain control of the sword and then follow through with the thrust. For the purpose of just a mechanic here, I'm thinking my opponent pushes me down and initiates a thrust. I have to yield to keep myself safe.
Yeah.
From here, I'm either attacking their body or attacking their sword with a very powerful blow that they have to do something about. They either have to disengage it, back away from it, or try to find it. Regardless, my cut is a powerful blow that's aiming to either strike their body through or cleave through their sword. So imagine a breaking action. I'm trying to expel their sword strongly. Tactically, it's going to lead to 2 situations. situation number one. I've begun the action. I've broken their sword. Their sword is expelled. It's no longer in contact with my sword. I find the center line. I immediately place my sword on the center line that's going to keep me safe. I find where their sword needs to be. Then I follow through with my thrust. Option number two. I initiate my thrust. They begin their counterattack. I try to break this sword. They disengage. There's still a threat in front of me. So I find their sword and gain through it. So we have two situations, the Giocco Stretto and the Giocco Largo situation. In the Giocco Largo situation, where they moved into Giocco Largo, you stayed in Giocco Largo, and then you execute a thrust. You just have to find the line, basically the center line, the most optimal sort of center line. In person, I can show you. Or again, if you have any more questions, if you have any concerns about this, let me ask me by chat, and I'll draw a diagram or try to clarify it. If there is a sword pointed at you, you must simply find it. So really thinking about it as I'm delivering my thrust, cut, oops, there's a sword, just come back and find the sword and gain through it. That will work as well. It's useful to really think about it as you finish a cut and you're not in the ideal position. You're not in Giocco Stretto. You're still in Giocco Largo. You're moving from Giocco Largo to Giocco Stretto. That's kind of the emphasis of the particular drill. Does that answer kind of the question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. All right, for the last 3 minutes, let's do this vigorously. So what I want you to consider is you're initiating a cut. We can actually keep it fairly simple. You can deliver a cut that's going to end in Giocco Largo. You're either going to end in Cingara, Porta de Ferro, Finestra Sinistra, or Finestra Destra. From there, you're going to execute a thrust and recover. So I'm delivering cut, thrust, recover, cut, thrust, recover, cut, thrust, recover, cut, thrust, recover. And I'm just going through the 4 quadrants here, where either my opponent defends or to disengage or something along those lines. Actually, for the purpose of partner drill, you can really think about it as I deliver a cut, my opponent backs up and disengages. There's a sword pointed in front of me. I need to find it immediately. And you can do that with every single one of the cuts. So starting from every quadrant, you're cutting into the opposite quadrant, following through with the thrust. We have 2 minutes. Go ahead and begin. I hit my ceiling there, so if you guys are looking for that, that is it. As I'm doing the drill, consider triangle steps if you have space constraints. You do not need to move forward. You can move into the weapon, away from the weapon, or around the weapon, just so that you do not have to continuously move forward. One more minute. Thirty more seconds. Ten more seconds. And time. All right, it is 7 o'clock as some banging pots are letting me know.
Yeah.
If you have any questions, if you have any, actually, if you have any questions, I'm going to leave this on. I'm going to go cheer, but we'll let salute out now. If you have any questions, come back in a minute and I'll be able to answer any of the questions. Weapons at your side. Thank you all for joining me. Arte.
Arte.
ardore,
Ardore.
onore.
Onore.
You guys have a great night. I'll be back.